General Hospital spoilers for Friday. May 23 tease that Trina is spiraling into a state of extreme anxiety as she increasingly senses disturbing undercurrents between Drew and Kai, two names that seemingly have no connection, yet are now linked in a chain of covert, dangerously calculated actions. What began as brief encounters and seemingly coincidental exchanges of information has gradually evolved into something far more frightening. Drew and Kai are working together with a level of secrecy and coordination that feels anything but transparent. Every time Drew is involved in a confidential hospital meeting or a behind-the-scenes encounter with high-ranking figures, Kai seems to follow like a shadow, leaving behind vague traces that unsettle Trina. She starts to question the true nature of their connection. This is more than random collaboration. It could be an underground alliance driving hidden agendas that neither she nor others have fully realized. Trina's fears aren't unfounded. She's witnessed Drew use his influence to interfere in internal hospital investigations, hindering efforts to promote transparency. But when Kai, a supposed outsider with no official authority, roams freely through secure hospital corridors and appears in off-limit spaces, Trina's internal alarm bells start to ring louder. She cannot ignore these abnormalities, especially as critical information appears to be leaking, decisions are being made without clear origin, and even some of her close colleagues are being mysteriously reassigned without explanation. Trina feels like she's being dragged into a murky web she never wanted to enter, where Drew and Kai are pulling the strings behind the curtain, and she's nothing more than a powerless witness. The obsession starts creeping into her daily life. She begins to feel watched. Her phone occasionally loses signal, emails are marked as read before she opens them. These seemingly small details feed a growing sense of paranoia because Trina knows Drew never acts without purpose, and if Kai is truly his partner, they're not just hiding something. They're executing a calculated operation, and won't hesitate to harm anyone who stands in their way. Trina tries to warn those close to her, but she's met with skepticism and cautious glances. She gradually realizes that she's being isolated, not because she's wrong, but because she's the only one who sees what's really happening. In that isolation, fear morphs into obsession. Trina begins gathering evidence, secretly tracking Kai's movements, recording fragmented conversations between Drew and key hospital figures. She knows that without proof, her words will be dismissed, and could even cost her vital positions at the hospital. But the deeper she digs, the more cracks she uncovers, signs of a long-term scheme operating under the guise of cooperation and reform. And Kai, the man everyone believes to be an investor, a harmless companion, turns out to be guarding secrets that could blow the entire system apart if revealed. Trina now stands at the crossroads of truth and safety, and with every passing second, she feels the urgency. If she doesn't act soon, she could become the next victim in the twisted power game that Drew and Kai are quietly bringing to life. This year's nurses' ball has come to an end. The spotlight fading, the applause dying down, but its aftermath is far from cold. On the contrary, it's becoming the catalyst for an underground storm that's about to explode. Amid the glamorous gowns, the breathtaking performances, and the seemingly heartfelt reunions, another mask has been stripped away, revealing the buried schemes now unraveling in uncontrollable ways. And at the center of this chaos, one name is beginning to rise like a force to be reckoned with: Tracy. She is not just a woman carrying deep wounds, she is fueled by a chilling, calculated thirst for revenge. After everything that unfolded during the nurses' ball, the secret revelations, the quiet glances exchanged between opposing forces, the whispered strategies over wine and dim lights, Tracy has gathered enough puzzle pieces to launch a dangerous counteroffensive. She no longer lurks in the shadows, nor is she a silent observer. What she witnessed has reignited the fire of a time when she shook boardrooms, manipulated investors, and made even the most powerful names in Port Charles tread carefully. Now, realizing that everything she once owned, her honor, her influence, her legacy, and her recognition, is under threat from those who fancy themselves smarter, younger, and slicker, Tracy sees no choice but to strike back. The trouble began when Tracy felt insulted, not through words, but through subtle, insidious actions. The fake handshakes, the polite smiles at the nurses' ball now haunt her, because she knows those who stood beside her that night are the very ones conspiring to overthrow her behind the scenes. What looked like harmless jokes on stage were actually sharp jabs at her waning position in the fast-shifting world of power and finance. This didn't just wound her, it enraged her. And not with outbursts or yelling, but with a quiet, dangerous anger, sinking into every step of the revenge plan she's now calculating down to the finest detail. Tracy's recent moves are anything but impulsive. She's beginning to restructure her network, discreetly reconnecting with old allies. Former rivals, even those who once betrayed her, to rebuild the empire she once ruled. She doesn't need to publicly declare war. Every move she makes, reinvesting in strategic funds, reclaiming voting rights on powerful boards, placing loyal operatives into projects controlled by Drew and others, serves as a silent but lethal blow. She isn't just out to restore her reputation. She wants every single person who underestimated her to pay. And there's no better time than post-nurse's ball, when everyone is drained and distracted, to ignite this mad, methodical plan. The new obsession burning within Tracy has become her most potent fuel. She no longer acts for power, but for survival, because she knows that if she does nothing, she'll be erased from Port Charles's influence map. And Tracy will never accept being sidelined. She was not born to bow. Her revenge won't come with guns or knives, but with the systematic destruction of every foundation her enemies have built, every relationship they rely on, every asset they hold. No one is safe, not even the seemingly innocent. In Tracy's eyes, betrayal isn't just an act, it's silence. The game she's preparing for isn't for the faint of heart. This is a game of information, espionage, manipulation, and takedown. And while no one may say it aloud, those who once laughed with her at the nurse's ball now feel a chill when they recall each word, each handshake, each smile shared with her. Because now they know. This is no longer the Tracy who could brush off an insult. This is Tracy reborn from the ashes, her fury hidden behind a calm exterior. A Tracy quietly rebuilding her empire. A Tracy waiting for the perfect moment to make everyone realize how gravely they misjudged her. And Port Charles, only just emerging from the glitz of the nurse's ball, now stands on the brink of a silent quake. A string of unpredictable, unorthodox, and unannounced moves is beginning. And at the heart of it all, none other than Tracy. The woman who never backs down. Now moving forward with the deliberate madness of someone betrayed, underestimated, and dead set on reclaiming everything, at any cost. Carly stood motionless in her office. The fading daylight streaming through the blinds casting faint stripes across her tense face. A letter had just been placed neatly on the desk, but it carried a crushing weight. It was an offer from Brennan, the man she once trusted, once saw as a new anchor during the days she believed she was finally regaining stability. But now, the offer wasn't an opportunity. It was a velvet-wrapped dagger, delivered at the moment Carly was most exhausted, most wounded, and most vulnerable. This wasn't just a financial deal or a media partnership like before. It was an invitation for her to step fully into Brennan's sphere of control, to become his public partner. His spokesperson for the projects he was using to mask the resurgence of his hidden power ambitions. Brennan didn't issue threats directly, but every detail in the proposal reeked of a chilling imposition. If Carly refused, she could lose everything, her shares in the hotel chain, the investments she had poured her savings into. Even her already shaken personal credibility following recent family scandals. But if she accepted, she would have to bow to a man whose true nature she now fully understood, a master manipulator. Someone who used trust as a weapon and emotions as shackles. Brennan didn't just want Carly by his side for appearances. He wanted her to be living proof of the soft pivot he was preaching, a human shield painted with noble intentions. While behind her stood a manipulation machine that no one who entered ever escaped intact. Carly felt cornered, where every option carried serious consequences. She had once proudly rejected the wrong path, had walked through the fiercest battles of her life without losing herself. But this time was different. Brennan wasn't attacking directly, he was making her doubt her own clarity. Those around her were in their own crises, Michael was embroiled in a new battle against Brennan's remnants in the WSB. Jocelyn was struggling to keep her spy identity secret, and Sonny remained entangled in worries over Brenda and the reconstruction of his power base. Carly was more alone than ever, and Brennan knew it. He picked the perfect moment to strike, a blow aimed at her pride, at her desire to stand tall and exist on her own terms. Brennan's evolution only made things more unhinged. He was no longer the shadowy manipulator, he was stepping into the light, attending major meetings, making public statements about reform and progress. But Carly knew better. The more visible Brennan became, the more dangerous he was. He was turning himself into someone beyond the reach of law and public opinion, and that made his offer the perfect trap. Acceptance meant complicity. Refusal meant a direct confrontation without protection. Inside Carly's mind, a war raged between reason and survival instinct. A part of her wanted to reject it all, to expose Brennan at any cost, to hold fast to the uncompromising integrity she had always prized. But another voice whispered that maybe it was time to be practical, for her future, for her children, for the hard-earned place she had carved in the ruthless world of business. And that hesitation was the most terrifying part, because it proved that Brennan had struck at Carly's deepest fear. Losing everything with no one left to stand by her. She knew this wasn't just a personal choice. Her decision would affect Michael, Jocelyn, and the fragile Corinthos family structure that had already been rocked by too many shocks in too little time. If she said yes, Brennan would gain the leverage to reclaim control of the entire board. But if she refused and failed, she might drag everyone she loved into a brutal, endless war of retribution. And in Port Charles, everyone who thought they could handle Brennan had paid a steep price. Carly knew that better than anyone. Now, as the offer lay silent on the desk like a question that begged no answer, Carly had to confront herself, the woman who had weathered countless storms, now forced to choose between diving back into a power vortex to protect what she had built, or letting it all go to preserve her dignity in a world that no longer had room for innocence. And whatever she chose, nothing would ever be the same again. This was a defining moment for Carly, not shaped by action, but by choice. A choice that, though silent in form, echoed like thunder, heralding a storm no one would be able to avoid. Jason stepped out of the hospital boardroom, his face ice cold, the screen of his phone still lit in his hand, its glow as chilling as the message he had just received. The call came from an untraceable number, with no clear voice, only a short, heavily encrypted recording, yet enough to tell Jason that something terrible was unfolding. And it started in Los Angeles. The caller didn't identify themselves, but the message was unmistakable. Sonny was in danger, not from old enemies, but from a new network. Something Jason had never faced before. Something quietly seeping into the empire Sonny once ruled with absolute control. Jason was not easily shaken, but this time, every clue pointed to a crisis like no other. Brick and Spinelli, two of his most trusted allies, vital links in the organization's logistics and cyber defense, had gone silent after taking on a mission in LA, involving the investigation of suspicious cash flows into charitable foundations connected to Sonny. Their last report mentioned a rising intermediary organization with encryption so advanced it defied conventional decryption methods. Jason had instructed them to observe only, not engage. But clearly, they had been pulled into a trap much larger than anticipated. Now, they'd vanished without a trace. The situation spiraled into madness when Jason began receiving coded signals embedded in seemingly harmless files, audio clips with distorted voices, flickering images from LA dock surveillance footage, and especially, fragments of conversations that confirmed one terrifying truth: Brick had been captured. And Spinelli might be working under duress for the enemy. This wasn't just a personal threat, it was a direct assault on the entire information structure Jason and Sonny had spent decades building. Jason took immediate action. He canceled his personal schedule, withdrew from all Port Charles operations, and began compiling a confidential contact list, individuals who owed him favors, who weren't tied to any organization, but had the skill and loyalty to act when summoned. He told no one, not Sonny, not Carly, not anyone in the Corinthos family. Because if this threat was real, the smallest slip could trigger an all-out offensive. What Jason didn't expect was the twist. Brick and Spinelli's findings were tied to Brennan, the man thought to be vanquished but whose remnants were quietly rising. Brennan wasn't dead. He had only retreated to restructure. And now, he was targeting Sonny not merely for revenge, but to seize control of the entire underground financial and logistics network the Corinthos family had operated for years. Brennan knew Jason was the biggest obstacle. And by neutralizing Spinelli, the man who could decode any firewall, he could paralyze Jason without ever confronting him directly. Jason, driven by instinct, knew there was no other option but to reawaken his true self, not the quiet guardian, but the crisis handler, the enforcer who eliminated threats before they could turn into war. He began moving in the shadows, tapping into old covert alliances with international organizations that had once worked with him on Black Ops missions. And using a separate encryption map left behind by Spinelli, a digital blueprint only accessible through fingerprint-coded authentication. Jason wasn't just trying to rescue Brick and Spinelli. He was preparing for the worst-case scenario. If his suspicions were correct, and Brennan had compromised a portion of the financial network in LA, then Sonny's entire operation could be under surveillance. One misstep from Sonny could not only collapse the empire, but fracture the entire network of loyalty and power that held the Corinthos organization together. This chaos wasn't terrifying because of its violence, it was terrifying because of its silence. No bombs. No bullets. Just data manipulation, substituted files, unanswered calls, and Jason, alone. Staring into the dark veil of an enemy who had learned how to conquer without ever firing a shot. He said nothing. But his eyes had changed. The look of a man preparing for a battle with no retreat. Where every decision could mean life or death, not just for him, but for the very system he had fought so hard to protect. And this time, if Jason failed, Port Charles would cease to be Port Charles. It would become the final battlefield of an era ending in the silence of those who once defined its history. Mac finally felt a little relief after weeks of living in constant anxiety. When Anna seemed to be starting to regain control of the mental turmoil and erratic behavior that had the entire town of Port Charles on edge. For Mac, who had always considered Anna not just a colleague but an integral part of his extended family at the police department and in the community itself, seeing her begin to regain her sense of reason, sanity, and inner balance was a small ray of light amid the chaos. But this peace was fragile, because looking deeper into the recent events, Mac understood that things had not really calmed down. On the contrary, there were quiet adjustments taking place that could lead to an explosion larger than anything they had ever experienced. Anna, despite seeming to have controlled her behavior and returning to the image of a strong, professional woman, still had an unstable energy. Mac noticed that Anna had frequent pauses, lost glances, and occasional small but inconsistent reactions, as if some part of her was still being pulled back by forces she couldn't fully control. Mac's anxiety didn't disappear, but instead turned into a kind of simmering wariness. And what worried him most was that these changes didn't seem to originate from within Anna, but from external adjustments that someone, or some force, was making around her. Felicia, who had been by Mac's side both professionally and personally, also began to sense a strange atmosphere permeating the entire periphery where Anna was trying to regain her balance. Old friends began to act wary. Internal investigations were halted for no apparent reason, and worse, some files related to Anna's old campaigns were suddenly resurrected by higher-ups with vague explanations. Felicia, with her keen intuition, knew that this was no coincidence. It was a sign of a covert suppression at work, one that did not target Anna directly by confronting her, but sought to isolate her from her former supporters, from within and without. Mac and Felicia knew that if they did not act now, Anna would fall back into defensive mode, and this time, she might not have the strength to hold out. They began to carefully review Anna's recent contacts, especially those meetings that she had not actively attended but had been invited to by people claiming to represent high-ranking agencies. Mac, with his executive experience and keen strategic analysis, discovered that there were at least 3 new people in positions of influence near Anna, from administrative advisors to technical analysts. They both had clean records, but they had come too close and too quickly, which was never normal in a security environment as sensitive as theirs. Mac and Felicia's conversations were no longer hypothetical. They began to sketch out a new map of influence, one where Anna was at the center of a much larger plan, where she was no longer a doer but a target to be observed and regulated. And that regulation wasn't to stabilize her, but to make her a more manageable version of herself, less suspicious, less interrogative, and able to be gently led into unquestioned missions. Mac knew he couldn't let that continue, even if it meant confronting his superiors, or even resigning from whatever position he held to avoid being bound by administrative rules. He was willing to do so. Felicia didn't hesitate, either, and began rekindling old connections from her days in civilian intelligence, searching for people who could provide information about who was really behind Anna's manipulations. The oppression they were discovering was no longer a theoretical concern. It was evident every day, every hour, in the eyes of friends who no longer dared to speak honestly, in the absence of allies who had stood by her side, in the seemingly innocuous administrative directives that slowly and terrifyingly suffocated her. Mac and Felicia were engaged in a silent war. Not to defend their honor, but to protect a person who was being pushed to the edge between self and control. Anna didn't yet know she was being watched, but Mac and Felicia did. And they wouldn't let her be sucked back into a system she had helped build, now silently obliterated by it. It was time to fight back, not with guns, but with sanity, loyalty, and everything they had left before it was too late.